I want to bring in Edgar Sandoval. He is a New York Times reporter who covers Texas, focusing on the Latino community and the Mexico border. Edgar, it's great seeing you. You spent a lot of time there at the RGV as well. What did you learn from people there?
Thank you for having me, first of all. I went to high school and college in this part of Texas, so I'm very familiar with the place and its people. And in the past, when I've interviewed undocumented residents, it's always been a challenge because they don't want to draw attention to themselves and to the authorities. But this time, I found it a lot more challenging to find such people. There were a lot of meetings that I had set up. People didn't show up. People start returning my phone calls after agreeing to talk to me initially. So there's a real palpable fear of uncertainty because all they know is that President-elect Trump has said there's going to be mass deportations taking place. They just don't know what that's going to look like. So there's a lot of fear.
And how do you explain, Edgar, that apparent dichotomy between people who can say that they're fearful for themselves, for their families, but also support President-elect Trump?
I think, when I talk to voters, people tell me what they tell other people, that they were worried about, the price of the grocery store, the house interest rates were going up dramatically. And they think about the economy as their main issue. And what they also saw the border crisis, develop before them, right? So they weren't even happy about that either. But they always thought that their neighbors were going to be safe. They were thinking about the people that were crossing in large numbers, which were from Venezuela and other countries. But now their neighbors who are undocumented fear that they also may be a target, right? So they don't know if they're going to just focus on one category of migrants and not the other. So now the undocumented people who live in the area are looking at their neighbors and thinking, do they think I'm undocumented as well? Are they going to report me to the authorities?
Yeah, and Morgan, it's almost as if there is sometimes a clear difference between if you speak to people who have lived in the United States, many of them for decades, that have U.S.-born children, right, and that are always forgotten. Anytime there's a talk about immigration reform, about this and that, those 10, 11 million people who have been here for decades, they're forgotten. The dreamers who pay taxes through ITIN and a whole lot more, and the dreamers. But they see what Donald Trump says is going to happen with a little bit of a different perspective because they have seen the humanitarian crisis at the border in these last couple of years through a different lens.
They are the humanitarian crisis. It is them, right? I mean, it is their neighbors, it is them, it is their children. It's interesting, Maria, who we just interviewed there, she said, my kids are trying to hide me. My kids who are American-born citizens are trying to hide me because at this point, we don't know what is going to happen. So the fear is new, the fear is palpable, and the messaging has worked. I mean, what Edgar said is 100% true. People are concerned about the economy and how they're going to put food on their table. But I think what we'll see to stand the test of time, the real metric will be if prices go back down to pre-pandemic levels. Does the support for the president-elect continue? Does it still outweigh the question of legality and status?
Yeah, and Edgar, how does one explain clearly the difference between the migrant crisis and immigration reform for thousands, millions of people who have been in this country for decades, many who have U.S.-born children, the dreamers? How is it that it's always bunched together? How can we help to clarify that difference?
No, you're right. There are a lot of what we call mixed status families, where the family member may be undocumented, but their children or their spouse is a U.S. resident or a legal resident. So a lot of them fear a different kind of family separation. And one of them gets deported, for example, then they won't be able to see the children anymore. And some of them are making plans to what to do in case they get picked up, at the workplace or even during a traffic stop. And activists have been training some of these residents on what to do. For example, they're being told to prepare a power of attorney letter in case they never come home and their children can be adopted by a legal resident so they don't end up in foster care, for example. They're also being told to be really obedient at traffic infractions, not to avoid attention from the police, because that can also land them in jeopardy.